Staff, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the special council meeting of the council for May 2020. My name is Councillor Margaret Thomas, and as Mayor, I will be chairing this meeting. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on and share the message of the elders. Kaya kaya burdias, marman and yoks, nuna de mort, Nitchakula Nalamaya Kalamunda Buja Yayi, Nandurapan, Wajulas Kulan, Jina, Nuna Danicha, Nunga Buja, Nunga Burdias Kura Yayi, Burda Burda, Kedalak, Burda, Kaya, Yunga. Hello, welcome to our leaders, men and women who have come to our place today, this evening, and I'm happy to see you all standing on Noongar land of their elders, past, present and future. Thank you. The operations of Council and the agenda for this meeting are governed by the provisions of the Local Government Act, standing orders and rules of conduct. All matters of business listed in the agenda will be dealt with as separate decisions of Council. Thank you for your attendance and interest. Attendance, are there any apologies?
Through the Chair, there are no apologies, but Councillor Billage is running late.
Thank you. We now move on to public question time, and we have 4 questions. And could I ask Mr. Digby Johnson to come and ask his question? And Mr. Johnson, would you mind stating your name and address for the minutes?
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Councillors. My name is Digby Johnston, and I live at 113 Alderside Road, Eastbrook.
Would you mind just doing 3 questions and then I'll get them answered and then do the next 3? Could you just pause there and we'll get some answers from the Director?
Through the Chair, thank you for your questions, Mr. Johnson. In answer to the first question in relation to the patronage numbers of 350, the City didn't issue a planning approval for 350 patrons. The City issued a planning approval for 80 patrons. There was subsequently a Department of Health approval for a wastewater treatment system that allowed for patronage of 350. However, the planning approval only allowed for 80. In regards to the second question, the development was substantially commenced, and as such, the approval did not lapse, the approval for 80 patrons. And the third question in relation to, is the City aware of the conditions set granting the permits, and specifically the Shire President's clear comments to the applicant? Yes, the City is aware of the conditions set on the building permit, but we don't have record. We don't have record or we're able to source any information in regards to any previous Shire President making any comments to the applicant.
Thank you. If you'd like to continue and perhaps just do them in lots of 3 if there's more.
Does the applicant intend to have weddings at the venue? Department of Water and Environmental Regulation, DEWA, approved the applicant's wastewater management plan. The third question is, have DEWA agreed to nutrient retention and setback distances to drinking water source protection areas?
Director.
Through the Chair, thank you again for your questions, Mr Johnson. The City, does the applicant intend to have weddings at the venue? The applicant has sought approval for an expansion of the restaurant, not specifically a wedding venue. Have the Department of Water Regulation approved the applicant's wastewater management plan? No. Department of Water, as an advisory agency, are not supportive of the application, which is evident through the officer's report. However, the City has given due regard to the comments of the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation in its assessment of the proposal, and that is outlined in the officer's report. Have DEWA agreed to nutrient retention and setback distances to drinking? No. DEWA, as an advisory agency, are not supportive of the application. However, the City has had due regard for those matters that have been raised by DEWA as part of its assessment.
Question 4. Has the applicant provided the City with a summary of the economic benefits of a larger facility?
Through the Chair,
Next
no.
one. In the agenda, page 28, environmental implications, item 135, on balance, the City considers that the strict compliance with the management and mitigation measures can be applied to the proposal. The proposed question is shown as to have minimal environmental implications. The question: who warrants the strict compliance? What are the legal ramifications of failures to any of the compliances?
Through the Chair, thank you for the question again, Mr Johnson. The City will regulate compliance should the application be approved with the relevant conditions, and should compliance not be met, there are penalties under the City's local planning scheme and the Planning and Development Act for non-compliance with conditions.
Have DEWA expressed its concerns with stormwater generation and dispersal in regard to contaminants, hydrocarbons, especially from the car parking facilities?
Through the Chair, yes.
On page 59 of the Middle Helena Catchment Strategy, MHCS, under recommendations, refer all planning applications that are not consistent with the strategy or with State Planning Policy 2.7, Public Drinking Source Policy, to the West Australian Planning Commission, WAPC, for advice prior to determination. Question: does the City intend to seek the advice of WAPC, as this amendment is not consistent with the MHCS as evidenced in the various DEWA correspondences to the City?
Thank you for your question, Mr Johnson. Thank you again. And the City has considered this specific clause and points within the Middle Helena Catchment Strategy, and has complied with that in terms of referring the application to the Department of Water for comment. Based on the City's assessment of the strategy, there's no requirement to refer the application to the West Australian Planning Commission.
What is the definition of a restaurant under the town planning? I'll start again. What is the definition of a restaurant under the City's Town Planning Scheme number 3, and does it comply with the Priority 2 P2 source protection of the MHCS?
Through the Chair, what's the definition of restaurant under the City's local planning scheme, and does it comply with the P2 water source protection for the Middle Helena catchment? I'll quote the City's planning scheme in regards to the definition of restaurant. A restaurant means a premises primarily used for the preparation, sale and serving of food and drinks for consumption on the premises by customers for whom seating is provided, including premises that are licensed under the Liquor Act. Restaurants can be considered in P2 drinking water source areas subject to conditions.
Are the Council aware that DEWA are... I'll start again. Are the Council and DEWA aware the dam on which the car park storm water is being directed is a natural spring?
Through the Chair, thank you for your question. The City cannot answer for DEWA. It appears that this feature is on a separate site.
Right. Shepherd Design Services drawing mentioned the ATU is to have a bunding to retain spills and leakages. Does this not suggest that spills or leakages will occur, and the ATU positioning is very close to Hackett's Gully waterways?
Through the Chair, the bunding is a proposed mitigation measure should it occur.
We hope it doesn't. In accordance with DEWA, to the City dated the 26th of February 2020, DEWA reiterates DEWA cannot support the proposal for the reasons stated above. However, should the decision-making authority resolve to approve the proposal, contrary to DEWA's advice, then the following conditions of approval are recommended. Water Management Plan. Prior to the commencement of any site works, management plan is to be prepared and approved to the satisfaction of the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation and the City of Kalamunda. The approved water management plan shall be implemented to the satisfaction of the City of Kalamunda. The water management plan should identify and address all potential risks to water quality from the existing land area uses and proposed development, including but not limited to wastewater loadings and management, nutrient budget and efficient disposal field details, management of stormwater from car parks and roads, management of irrigation and mitigation measures for on-site and off-site water quality is proposed if management systems fail. The water management plan should be prepared in accordance with the relevant water quality protection notes, WQPN, and guidelines, including WPQN 25 land use compatibility tables for public drinking water source areas, WQPN 70 wastewater treatment and disposal domestic systems, WQPN 79 rural restaurants, cafes, taverns and near sensitive water resources, WQPN 88 rural tourist accommodation, and the last one, the Middle Helena Catchment Area Land Use and Water Management Strategy. Question: can the Council satisfy DEWA's conditions?
Thank you again for your question. Through the Chair, the City will consult with the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation the various aspects of the conditional approval should the application be approved and proceed.
I have only 3 left. Why has the Development Services not provided a risk manager report for bushfire?
Through the Chair, there's no requirement for a risk management report to be provided in relation to bushfire. Other information in relation to bushfires attached to the item, including a bushfire attack level assessment, bushfire management plan and emergency evacuation plan.
As the recommendations from correspondence from DEFIS to the City dated the 5th of May 2020, which is contained in the agenda's associated documents, been acted upon?
Through the Chair, they are conditional requirements and they are matters that are capable of being addressed through a conditional requirement on the advice of DFS to the City's satisfaction.
Why has the Development Services not provided a risk management report for traffic?
Through the Chair, similarly to the bushfire report, there's no requirement for a specific risk management report to be provided in relation to traffic. Other information in relation to traffic is attached to the item, including a transport impact statement.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions, Mr. Johnston. I would now like to ask Mr. Stephen Oxley to come, state his name and address and ask your questions. And similarly, if there's more than 3, could you keep them in lots of 3? Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and fellow councillors. I just have one comment, really. It's mainly regarding...
Mr. Oxley, would you just state your address for the minute taker? Thank you.
350 Mundeering Weir Road.
Thank you.
PC. Mine's mainly regarding the noise. In PC Brook, the noise echoes across the valley, and to give you an idea, I'm sort of 3 properties down from the proposed venue. I can't know directly line of sight, but the people on the opposing side of the valley to me, I can usually hear what they've got on the TV at night. They can hear my children in the swimming pool. The sound echoes across the valley. considerably. So I'm just wanting to know if there's going to be a curfew on any music activities, because basically in the daytime, as most of you know, the road is extremely busy. Usually by 6 p.m. in the evening, things are starting to quiet down. You can hear the kangaroos, the bush and everything. This evening at PC Brook is fantastic, as it quite often is. The hoons don't come out till 9 or 10 o'clock at night. But having some music transmitted across the valley on a regular basis is not going to be a very pleasant living environment. So
Director, would you like to respond?
Through the Chair, thank you for your question. I've sought reference to the operational management plan attached to the agenda item, and external amplified music is proposed between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. Mondays to Saturday and 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Sundays and public holidays. A 10 amp limit to power supply is proposed for external music, and notwithstanding those stipulations within the operational management plan, the applicant is required to comply with the environmental regulations in terms of noise, and any complaints in regards to noise will be investigated by the city, and may include noise monitors and the like being put at residents should there be issues with noise, and testing those noise measurements and readings against the noise regulations.
Thank you for your question. I had a call today, councillors, from Mr. Mike Longo, who asked me to read his question out tonight as he was unable to attend. I'm sending this as the City of Kalamunda ratepayer, owner of a primary industry business on Hummerston Road, as well as on behalf of a family member who has been a resident of Hummerston Road for nearly 80 years and owns one of the properties that would be impacted if the water was contaminated by the proposed ATU system. As stated in the City's report in point 136, there is a high risk of water contamination and the likelihood is possible. It states that the water will be tested every 2 years, which is not frequent enough, and City's recommendation is twice a year, which is still not acceptable, and any contamination could cause significant damage in this time. Question: could this be changed to testing at least every month whilst the creek is actively running, which is July till November, as nearby properties solely rely on groundwater for domestic use and primary production? Second question: there is also a concern for the lack of sustainability with the current system. Water is such a precious commodity, it would be preferable to use a system where it can be reused rather than wasted. Point 7.3 is in the water report states the soil removes all the gut bacteria and viruses, and then point 11 states the water is sterile, clear and odourless. So which is correct? And the third question: could an ATU system be used where the water could be recycled and used again for at least non-potable purposes, which would reduce any risk of contamination in the water catchment area?
Thank you for those questions, and through the Chair. Firstly, the conditions as advised by Mr. Longo was that it's recommended that it's monitored twice yearly. Advice that the City has sought indicates that monthly wouldn't be necessary unless there is a problem with the system or there has been a problem with the system, thereby you would test on a more frequent basis. However, the advice that we've received is that twice yearly is suffice. Should Council be of a view to increase the testing regime, that is possible through a modification to the conditions should the application be approved. With regards to the particulars around what's in the report, my understanding is that the system treats the water to a certain point that it is suitable for irrigation purposes for the areas that the irrigation and drip lines are located. In regards to the third, could the system be used for recycling purposes, my understanding is that the Department of Health and the wastewater system technology is not yet at that point, and that there would be significant and stringent approvals required to use that even for non-potable water purposes. Nonetheless, Nonetheless, the system that's proposed does have drip line and irrigation areas, and those drip line irrigation areas would be would use the water as a source.
Thank you. We also had questions from Mr. Eddie Van Rinswood, who is not here tonight, and those questions will be answered in writing.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. Sorry, can I
Yes.
just ask a question to the Director? Just on
Sure. Councillor Boyd.
Yeah, thank you. Just in respect to the Director's last question, and going on from Mr. Longo's query, it does state in the report on page 29, and I'm just wondering if the Director could maybe point me to where it is stated differently, that this includes a commitment to post-development service water monitoring and a conditional requirement for monitoring to occur at a minimum every 2 years. So it doesn't state twice a year, so I'm just wondering if the Director could maybe point me to where there is the condition for twice a year.
Through the Chair, the reports prepared by the applicant referenced in paragraph 29, condition number, recommended condition number, bear with me. Proposed condition number J states, prior to the occupation, a nutrient management plan must be submitted, including a water quality monitoring schedule, to the satisfaction of the City. On the advice of the Department of Water, the implementation of the water quality monitoring schedule will be, at minimum, twice a year when both Hackett's Gully and PC Brook are flowing, to ensure that water quality and water runoff is not being impacted by the disposal of wastewater.
Yeah, thank you. I did try to quickly find it while you were talking, but I couldn't. Thanks.
No problems.
And the last question we have is from the PC Brook Preservation Group, and their question is, why has the Council not considered applying 6.13 of the Government Gazette WA Standing Orders on page 303, available on the City's website? And I'll ask the CEO to respond to that question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question. The City Standing Orders do allow for Council to meet to hear public submissions, but it's not a compulsory requirement, it is a choice. In this instance, the Council agreed to hold a formal special Council meeting process, which still allows for public submissions to be heard through deputations and questions. The Council then has the option of hearing all questions and deputations and then deciding if they wish to deal with the officer's report, or they can also choose to defer or adjourn the meeting to a future time in order to absorb and understand all the deputations and questions that they received tonight. So it is an optional choice that Council decided to take. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We now move on to deputations, and we have 11 deputations tonight. So each deputation has 10 minutes, and could I ask the speakers if they have already heard what is in their deputation? They are very welcome to make it shorter. So let's move to the first one, which is Francesca Flynn. And we'll ask Francesca to come to the mic, state her name and address, and you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. My name is Francesca Flynn, and I reside at 1885 Rycroft Road in Glen Forest. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for letting me come and talk to you today. I'm making this deputation as Managing Director of Evergreen Consultancy and the primary consultant for the development. Just for transparency, I will state that I'm on the Kalamunda Tourism Committee and I authored the tourism strategy last year, but that's not in the capacity that I'm talking to you guys today. It's as the principal consultant for the development. So first off the bat, I want to express my strong support for the application and urge the councillors to approve it in full. I'd like to start by addressing some of the concerns that have been raised tonight that have been answered by the Director of Planning, but also some of the community queries that have come out. So starting with the consultation, there was a lot of responses. I've read each and every one of those responses to the city. In short, we've listened to what the community has said and we have changed the development in response to the community's concerns at great cost to the developer and time and expense. But, you know, this is something that we've done to address community concern. We have prepared a detailed response to the community comments, something that's been available online on the social media for Chalet Riggy since January 2020, and is something that we have shared so that residents can see that we've reviewed their concerns and tried to address them as best as possible. The letter also offered residents the chance to attend a site meeting at Chalet Riggy so they could look around the development and ask any questions. That's in addition to the meeting that we hosted back in October 2019 last year. So we already hosted one, we offered another one, and we also offered any resident the opportunity to come and have a chat with me as a consultant, and also to review any of the technical documentation that was provided to the city back in January. So I guess it's important to note that the applicant is a PC Brook resident. He is a member of our local community. He was part of the tourism committee as well. And in short, the support of this community is important to him. You know, I know that we're not always going to have everybody supporting a development, and I guess that happens in any development anywhere in Perth. But as a local resident, as a local business owner, the support of the community is important to the applicant. So community concerns have been raised regarding the sort of typical planning concerns that you'd expect to see: noise, traffic, parking, bushfire, and various consultant reports have been prepared by the applicant, some of which you've seen. There's been various iterations that demonstrate that the restaurant will not pose unacceptable risks or impacts to the surrounding community, providing that the development adheres to operational or development conditions. Now, I've only got a short time here, so I'm not going to go into all those things in detail unless there's specific questions. I'll move on to the water concerns. So, yes, the development isn't a priority to groundwater protection area, so DWER are automatically going to have their default position that 80 is the maximum, and that is across the board a blanket, you know, position by DWER, because I guess it's in that area, and that's what they're saying in accordance with the LUMS, which was mentioned earlier. So despite having approval to install the ATU from the Department of Health back in July last year, the applicant did listen to community concerns, did listen to DWER concerns, and engaged Evergreen to undertake more site investigation works, including drilling, soil sampling, surface water sampling, and to produce a new site water management plan, which is the one that you've all seen today. In short, the primary change is that the main irrigation area has been moved away from Hackett's Gully Creek. The Department of Health approval requires 30 metres from Hackett's Gully Creek. We've took that and moved it far, far away, so the primary irrigation area will now be over 150 metres away, which is 5 times that recommended or accepted by the Department of Health, and the residual irrigation area will now be over 50 metres away. So we've listened to those concerns and we've moved it. More importantly, all of the drainage from those irrigation areas will go west, so that is away from Hackett's Gully Creek. The plan also includes an ongoing commitment to undertake monitoring, as you guys have heard before. The applicant is happy to monitor. We'd originally suggested once a year because the creek's ephemeral, and when the water doesn't flow you can get funny readings once you read it and you're testing stagnant water. But again, the applicant is willing to test if that's what the council wants. If that's what will bring the comfort, more testing, then again that can be done easily enough. The plan also includes a commitment to various supporting works, earthworks, terracing of the site, and everything else that potentially could be needed to ensure that we are addressing best practice water quality management. So finally, onto the scale of the development, and this is something that again a lot of people have raised. People have bandied around really high numbers and been concerned that there's going to be 900 people there, and there's every number been bandied across the sun really, all the way from 80 to 1,000. We understand from our research that the restaurant previously in the 1970s operated with 350 people on a 350 square metre restaurant, and that's the original restaurant building. That is in accordance with Department of Health guidelines, which suggests roughly 1 person per 1 metre square in a restaurant area. Restaurant capacity in the hills is pretty much determined by wastewater treatment capacity. If you're down on the Swan Coastal Plain, usually the rule is 1 person per 1 metre square. and the development is usually constrained by things like parking. In the CBD, you don't have enough parking to support larger restaurants. However, here in the hills, our problem is usually either bushfire, traffic, or wastewater management. So we have expanded the size of the restaurant under existing building licenses. The footprint of the restaurant is now 850 square metres. According to the Department of Health, that equates to 850 people. The Department of Liquor and Gaming came and visited the site and they said 950 people. Obviously that's not going to work in this area. We're not connected to the sewerage, so that means we're limited by the capacity of the wastewater treatment system, which is limited to 480 people. So it's important to note as well that 480 people is not the number of patrons any one time. This is in any one day. And it's also including staff and contractors, so potentially that number will actually be slightly lower, maybe 460. 480 is the number that was approved by the Department of Health as a regulatory body, and it is the number that the applicant has since confirmed to me is what's needed to make the restaurant economically viable. For those of you who've been up there, it's a big restaurant. It is not going to be viable to operate it at 80 or even 350. We're really going to need to get those numbers to what we're applying for to be able to make it feasible. Otherwise, there's not really a business case to do that. So this increase that we're asking for from 350 to 480 is a 37% increase on the previous approval for the water system. And we feel that that's a reasonable increase given the size of the development footprint. It's large. It can accommodate those people in consideration of the various technical works that have been undertaken, the various reports produced by myself and other consultants, and also in consideration of other restaurants in the area or other venues. There's nothing in the immediate vicinity, but if you look at places like Core Cider in Pickering Brook, Mason Mill in Carmel, Mundaring Ware Hotel, and also Naked Apple Cider in Carragullen, all of those are similar patron numbers, and we believe that they're a really strong asset for the Perth Hills region and for Kalamunda, and we'd also like to be a part of that. The last thing to take into account when you're looking at the number of people that we want to have in the restaurant is the marketing focus that it will have. We're going to be targeting daytime groups, families who are wanting to come up and explore the Perth Hills, groups who want to come up and have large dinners together or large lunches together. There's currently nowhere that does that, and I've previously had it from experience from other jobs that I've done, where people come up to the hills and they want somewhere to go, groups of red hatters, I think they're called, or anyway, people coming up wanting to have large lunches and they're not able to do so, there's nowhere to go, and we're sort of forcing them to go elsewhere. And the city of Kalamunda is missing out. The businesses in the hills are missing out because there's just nowhere for these people to go. We want to focus on things like tour buses, on cyclists, on walkers. We're not after that nighttime market. We're after the breakfast and the lunch market. We can't predict the exact times that people are going to visit. But if you sort of look at the numbers and how they would break down over a day, you might have, say, 100 patrons for breakfast, say between 7 and 10. Maybe say about 280 patrons for lunch between 10 and 3, and then maybe the remaining 100 between 4 and 8. So it can easily be spread out amongst that day such that there isn't large numbers. It's also important to note that the...
Can I just ask you to wind up now, please?
Yes, okay, I'm on the last paragraph, sorry. In summary, in summary, Shallyriggy is a Kalamunda institution and a beautiful venue that the whole community can be proud of. The restaurant has operated on that site for over 70 years. Since 1946, and the applicant has taken great care and expense to restore it. Social media has been inundated. We've had hundreds of people wanting to share their memories of birthdays, anniversaries, celebrations, and basically expressing their interest in the restaurant opening again. And we hope that the council will support this application and allow the restaurant to continue being a Kalamunda legacy for many generations to come. Thank you, and I'm sorry, I've always got too much.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions of Francesca? Councillor Stallard.
Thank you. Through the chair, I suppose there's been some concerns also about the noise, and having lived and currently live around the valley, it certainly does echo and vibrate around. We often get our neighbours talking and having a good time at night, and we can hear everything that's going on. So I suppose my question then comes to, one, what type of music would you be intending and where, but also what are your means to mitigate the sound from echoing through the valley?
Yep, no worries. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, we can see why noise is a concern, especially the location of the restaurant in the valley, but the applicant has taken quite considerable measures to ensure that noise won't be a problem. Starting at the engineering level and choosing specially designed glass that is noise reducing, so that when those glass windows up to the balcony are brought down, there won't be any noise outside. There's operational conditions that we've proposed as well, such as nobody's allowed outside in the outdoor restaurant area and on the balcony after a certain time. I think it was 9 o'clock, I can't remember, potentially 10. There's no one to be in the outdoor restaurant area before 9 o'clock in the morning, so if the cyclists come, they can't be out there at 7 o'clock in the morning. What else have we done? Oh, acoustic music, that was it, so no amplified music after a certain time. Again, it's not really going to be a venue where you're going to have a huge DJ and large speakers. We envisage it as a family-friendly restaurant where you'd have acoustic Sunday sessions, kind of like they do at other venues in the hills. Nothing too loud and nothing in the evenings either.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, councillors? Councillor Sewell.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification. My understanding what councillors are being presented with today is to increase the numbers from 80 to 480, not 350 to 480, if I correctly interpreted that. Okay, just in terms of your comments, Francesca, that we were increasing from 350 to 480, I'm just seeking clarification on that. So, okay, thank you.
Sorry, can I respond? That comes from, thank you for your question, Janelle, that comes from the 2012 approval from the Department of Health for 350 patrons for the on-site wastewater treatment system, and that approval is stamped by the City of Kalamunda in November 2012.
Thank you. We have a question, follow-up question, Councillor Sewell.
So just for clarification, so in terms of what's been approved by this council, it has been 80. This is the first time it's been approved from 80 to...
Perhaps we could ask the Director to just clarify that.
Through the Chair, thank you for your query, Councillor Sewell. The City's existing planning approvals for the site restrict patronage numbers to 80 persons. A Department of Health wastewater system approval was issued and referred to the City for comment. The City assessed that wastewater approval or wastewater application on its merits and provided comment in 2012. The approval rests with the Department of Health, and the Department of Health issued a wastewater approval for 350. By virtue of the City providing comments on that wastewater application referral, does not supersede its planning condition requirement of 80. So in terms of a planning approval, the site has a patronage number of 80 per day, and the application being sought this evening is for an increase to 480. There was an existing Department of Health wastewater approval for 350 patrons, to which the City provided referral advice on, based on the merits of that application. That application has since lapsed and was never implemented.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Hi, Francesca. With regard to your normal operating hours and conditions, your noise management plan states that there will be isolated variances that may be expected, i.e. special events such as birthday celebrations. How often do you expect these sort of isolated variances to occur?
Thank you for your question. I don't know is the answer. I have no idea on how to predict those. Again, because we're focusing on that family-friendly feeling, we would hope that anyone who has these sort of birthday party celebrations would be in the daytime rather than in the evening. And again, if we reach the capacity in the daytime, you can't open in the evening anyway. I will be frank that there has been a lot of interest in the social media for people who've, say, had weddings there or who were proposed to at Chalet Riggy back in the 1970s, saying, oh, let's go and celebrate our anniversary there again. Let's go and relive the wedding or whatever. But I'm really not sure how many celebrations of that nature we'll have. We can obviously encourage people to do that in the daytime. But yeah, I don't know is the answer. I'm sorry.
Councillors, are there any other questions? Councillor O'Donnell.
If this was approved, what would be the time frame for all of the work for it to basically be ready to open? I mean, understanding that obviously with the COVID environment at the moment may not necessarily be able to open, but what, if ideal situations, would that mean?
Okay, thanks Brooke for your question. There's a lot of work yet to be done. There's a while to go. We would, if we got an approval, still need to develop a construction management plan. There's a whole heap of work still to be done. I would hope that within 12 months we can open, but you know, there is a lot of work to be done. I would say within a window of 6 to 12 months, if we get, you know, good contractors in who are going to work quickly, and you know, it'll be difficult to say, but there is a lot of work yet to be done. There's a lot of earthwork still to be done. The restaurant body itself is pretty much completed, but there will be some work to show that it comes up with food standards and things like that. There's the car parking yet to be finished. There's the ATU installation yet to be done. Earthworks, terracing, everything else that comes along with that. There's a substantial body of work yet to be done.
Follow-up question, Councillor O'Donnell.
Sorry, 2 more questions. The question about keeping numbers, that really stresses me out, that, you know, you guys are going to have to keep these numbers. I mean, people in restaurants struggle to have the 20 number that they're trying to keep count of, and that's just 20. How, because you've got multitudes of areas, how are you actually going to keep track of those numbers?
But I guess, thank you for your question. I think that's something that all restaurants have to comply with. I believe that all licensed venues have to keep records of how many people come through the door anyway as part of their license conditions. So even though it isn't easy to do, it's something you have to do anyway. It's compulsory if you're going to own a licensed restaurant. And there are a variety of ways, I guess, of doing that. You know, the most simple is a clicker system. When people come through the door, they'll also be focusing people on the main entranceway. If you've been to the site, there are a few doors to get into the venue, but we'll be funneling people from the car park up into the main entrance so that you're not losing anybody who's sort of, you know, come around the back and you know, you've missed them in the count. I think that there are more sophisticated electronic systems that you can use as well, and that'll be something we explore if we do get the approval, but unfortunately that's something that everybody has to do anyway, so yeah. Thank you.
You have another question? Does anyone else?
Sorry, I forgot.
Councillor O'Donnell.
With the current regulations, I guess smokers, I'm not a smoker, but I always think about, you know, they like to congregate and they make noise, and, you know, where, with the bushfires and stuff, where are people going to smoke?
Yeah, that needs to be determined, and it's a good question, thank you. I think it was mentioned in the bushfire plan about smoking, or maybe in the operational plan, that smokers will need to be in a designated area only. Away from any of the areas of natural bush, so, you know, more towards maybe the restaurant building, but away from the windows and the doors. They don't want any smoke coming inside, you know, it smells gross. Yeah, there will need to be a designated area, and there'll be signage there as well with lights, you know, sort of saying, bear in mind the noise and keep quiet, because it's not only bushfire as well, it's people, you know, chatting and stuff outside quite loud. So yeah, a designated area will be clearly signed, and anyone, you know, smoking anywhere else will be told to move there. But yeah, it's something we'll need to consider.
Are there any other questions, councillors? If not, thank you very much for coming to speak to us, Francesca.
Thank you everybody.
Madam Chair, could I have your indulgence? I've had a request from a Mr. Alan Axford who didn't realise he had to put his name down for a question. So could he still ask his question? And I also recall Councillor Blair had someone call through on email with a question too. Could Councillor Blair also ask that question?
Okay.
Hey, it's been read out? You're good?
Okay.
Yeah.
Alan Axford.
Yes, hello.
Would you please state your name and address and ask your question?
Yeah, Alan Axford, and I live at 45 Elson Road, which is not too far from the restaurant. Yeah, and well, what I want to say is the knock-off times, cessation times. If it goes past the cessation times, are the penalties effective enough to cause the owner not to go on after that time, the cessation times? And the other thing is, we get a very peaceful valley there, and that's why I live there. And that's probably why a lot of the other people live there, because it's a nice quiet valley, except for the motorbikes during the day. And well, we don't want to see that go. So it's very important that it has a cessation time, and it's supplied by the people, whoever runs the restaurant.
Thank you. I'll ask the Director to respond.
Through the Chair, thank you for your question, Mr Axford. There is conditional requirements that require compliance with the operational management plan, and should the development not close by those stipulated times, and there be evidence of the venue not closing by those stipulated times, that's a breach of planning conditions. And there are compliance measures under the Local Planning Scheme and Planning Development Act with fines in the order of thousands of dollars that are as a result of non-compliance with planning conditions. So there is a significant incentive for the operator to comply with those planning conditions, and should there be non-compliance with those planning conditions, the City will investigate, seek evidence, and potentially have to action compliance action against non-compliance to conditions.
Yeah. And why I mentioned about the peaceful valley, I mean, 480 people is a lot of people. For 80 up to 480, it's a fair jump. So that's the reason for a lot of noise. There seems to be open verandas outside the building there. So I suspect it could get noisy.
Do you have another question, Mr.
No, that's all now.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks. Good.
Madam Mayor, I'm sorry, I've just received another email from the gallery saying Mr Paul Smith also didn't know that he was meant to put his name down and has a question.
Mr Smith?
Can we make this the last one?
Mr Smith, would you like to come up, state your name and address and ask your question?
Hi, my name is Paul Smith. I live at 71 Alderside Road in Percybrook. On reading the documents for this application, one question that comes to mind is that, does the applicant really want a function centre and is trying to get it approved under the guise of a restaurant?
I will ask the Director to respond to that.
Through the Chair, thank you for your question, Mr Smith. The City's had a application put before it for a restaurant with an increase in patronage, and that's what has been assessed. There is land use definitions within our scheme for a restaurant and a function centre, and in this particular instance, it's been applied for a restaurant.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Councillors, the deputation order is when they applied, so if you just want to know that. And the second one is Mr Frank Lindsay. Mr Lindsay, would you please come up and give your deputation?
Good evening, Madam Chair, councillors and staff. My name is Frank Lindsay. I live at 95 Alderside Road in Percybrook. Since the report came up on the council's website on Thursday, like a great number of other people, I have not had time to fully digest the report, all of its contents. So I'm primarily going to limit my comments to the issue of bushfires, but I'll make some comments also about the history of this application, because I was a councillor at the time it came before council. I don't recall what year that was, but it was well over a decade ago. For the record, the officer's recommendation at that time, based I think primarily upon advice from the Department of Water, was to oppose the recommendation, bearing in mind that it was a non-conforming use, it had expired and not been operating for several years, and the concerns about the impact upon the water catchment. Notwithstanding that, I moved an amendment that succeeded, that we should support the proposal, subject to the applicant reaching an agreement with the Department of Water. So I supported it in qualified terms, and I continue to support the application proposal, but with qualifications. Historically, the restaurant probably operated at a capacity, as best I can recall, I attended the restaurant on a number of occasions, of between about 80, maybe 100. The applicants, the person who has spoken on his behalf this evening, said that their research showed that there may have been approval of around 350 at one stage. It would not have been possible to accommodate that sort of number in the restaurant previously, but I think I know where that figure might have come from. I say might, I do not know for certain. I have seen a document showing that there was approval from the then Shire of Kalamunda for a very large number of car bays that were never built, but they were approved. My suspicion, it's only a suspicion, is that there was a large number of car bays approved for special events, where you can get a special events licence. Be that as it may, there was never a capacity for 350 people on site. So what is being proposed is a very substantial increase of about 400%. So that is far in excess of anything that at the time Council first considered this was entertained. I expected that there would have been an increase, but certainly not of that magnitude. And the issue of magnitude, of course, raises a whole range of multiple other issues, everything from bushfire to evacuation plans to noise and wastewater management. I primarily just want to focus on the issue of bushfire implications tonight, because that's all the time that I've had really to look at this report. What is of concern, I think, is that the applicant was required to provide a bushfire attack level assessment, I think is the correct term. And DFES have stated in their attachment, their correspondence, I think it's attachment 8.1.1.5, it's a 3-page letter. I won't read out the full 3 pages, obviously. But I'll read out a couple of quotes. A formal response was previously provided, that is by DFES, this is them stating this to the city, for the proposed development dated the 5th of August 2019 for the same version of the Bushfire Attack Level Report. However, the issues raised have not been addressed. The BAL assessment, they go on, undertaken is still unable to be validated, as it is unclear if the separation distances from vegetation plots to the proposed development used to determine the BAL impact are applying the worst case scenario. They go on to conclude with a recommendation that insufficient information is available to them to make an assessment at this point in time. Now, this is a pretty important issue, a development in a bushfire-prone area, being brought to council for you to make a decision where you have no advice from DFES. Now, the staff are recommending at point 93 a way around this, basically that you handball it to the staff. If I can put it in short, I'll read it out. The applicant has provided a bushfire attack level assessment, which DFES says is inadequate, and assessment against the bushfire criteria in a bushfire management statement. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong part. Sorry, here it is. Prior to the occupation of the restaurant, the bushfire attack level assessment must be amended to the satisfaction of the City of Kalamunda to include amendments recommended by the Department of Fire and Emergency Services. I agree with that suggestion by the staff in as far as it goes, but I don't think it goes far enough. One of the things that can guide the council, I think, at this point in time, is a recent development approved for a restaurant in Carmel, sort of commonly known, I think, as the gin distillery proposal. Now, I spoke to the owner of that distillery this afternoon to find out what conditions were imposed upon his proposed development, and he has advised me of the following. I should just point out, and it's worth noting, that that proposed development, which he intends going ahead with, is for a restaurant of 225 people, of which at any one time a maximum capacity of 150 is allowed for. Now, I think as part of the recommendations, you should incorporate these three things at a minimum, which were incorporated in that proposal. That there be no trading on days with a catastrophic, extreme or severe bushfire rating. That was a condition that they imposed. I believe Councillor O'Connor was on the DAP when they made that assessment. Maybe Councillor O'Donnell as well, perhaps, was on the DAP. I know that that was a very controversial issue. That's what they determined after considering it in great detail. I think the staff should have recommended that to you, given that that precedent had already been set. And I would recommend that by way of amendment, you incorporate this ultimately. I recommend you don't do it tonight. I think you need to defer it and give this some more consideration. Have the staff consider it and word it properly based upon that precedent. So the first one is no trading on days with a catastrophic, extreme or severe bushfire rating. I might just add that the owner, the proponent of that development, Mr. Terry Martin, fully supports that condition. On other days, there is a distance trigger, which I'll call it a distance trigger for the lack of a better term. And that is the following, that from the radius with a circumference of 4 kilometres, that the restaurant, if you like, watch, for lack of a better term, watch and monitor what is happening. Within a 4 kilometre radius, that the facility will then be evacuated. Within a radius of 5 kilometres from the restaurant, it's too late to evacuate, they are to shelter in place. Now, I think all of those are wise and should be incorporated. Looking at the proposal, again related to bushfire management, bushfires, of course, can come at any time of the day. They don't have to come during daylight hours. They may very well occur at night time. So what would happen in the event of a bushfire occurring at night time, the facility having to be evacuated at night time? Instructions are going to be given to people to do certain things. Now, the problem is that power is often turned off. Even if it's not lost, it is turned off as a precaution to ensure that bushfire fighters are not having to contend with down and live power lines. So quite frequently, by the time you have to evacuate, the power has been turned off. So I would recommend that a backup generator be installed to provide lighting. Now, that's not a particularly radical suggestion, because I saw in a part of the recommendations from staff that I quickly scanned that they were proposing a backup generator to deal with the question of effluent from the wastewater treatment unit, so that that could continue to operate in the event of a power disruption. I would think it is more important to have a backup generator to power lights in the event of losing power at a time when there is a bushfire. So I think that should be incorporated into the proposal as well. That is all I really wish to say on the issue of bushfire management. Madam Chair, it's a very important issue in this area. I know the proponent has gone to great lengths to deal with it, but I think there's a few additional points that the Council should adopt in addition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindsay. I'm just going to ask the Director to comment on a couple of things you have suggested.
Thank you for your deputation, Mr. Lindsay. You made reference to Union Road Distillery that was considered by the Metro East JDAP in November last year. Just to clarify some of the factual points in relation to that application, I'm looking at the conditions of approval for that application at the moment, and Condition 5 has the maximum number of patrons for the restaurant. Maximum number of patrons for the restaurant shall not exceed 50 at any one time, which is quite different to the numbers that you'd referenced in your deputation.
That I was advised by him.
Fair enough. I also will note that the Union Road Distillery was considered a vulnerable land use under the State Planning Policy 3.7, a vulnerable land use because it had chalet components associated with its development proposal, and different elements of SPP 3.7 were triggered as a result of that, and more stringent bushfire planning mitigation measures were required as a result of that. So I just wanted to clarify in terms of comparing the proposals. They are different proposals, and the numbers that were stipulated were different. I'm referencing the conditions from the minutes of that meeting at the moment, and the nature of the requirements under state planning policy are that it's a vulnerable land use, therefore different measures were triggered.
That's not entirely correct. The restaurant and the chalets were each assessed individually and separately, and each had their own assessment made. So there are different criterion, I understand, on the chalets as opposed to the restaurant. And what I was referring to, and the conditions relating to the restaurant, are those for the restaurant, not the chalets.
Thank you. And I also would like to let you know that your first comment, no trading on catastrophic days, has also been mentioned by several councillors, so we're all on the same page. But thank you very much for your comments. And before you go, councillors, do you have any questions of Mr Lindsay? Councillor Boyd?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Maybe not directly for Mr Lindsay, but maybe more for the director to perhaps make a comment. Notwithstanding the comments that the director has already made in respect to the differences, I'm not sure whether it's geographic location that makes Union Road different to the application in front of us, that wouldn't necessarily preclude the conditions that Mr Lindsay has suggested from being imposed in the recommendations for this application?
Through the chair, no, it would be open for council to consider modifications to the Bushfire Management Plan or Operational Management Plan to ensure that further fire risk is mitigated, potentially over and above the requirements of State Planning Policy 3.7 for this particular category of land use. Notwithstanding that, the applicant, and it is important to always make council aware of it, the applicant does have the opportunity to appeal conditions and requirements of conditions, and should they be over and above state planning policy, that is a significant consideration for the tribunal should it ever get forward to them.
Are there any more questions for Mr Lindsay, councillors? Thank you very much for coming to speak to us. And now I would like to ask Mr Jeff Bauer to come and give his deputation. And I think, councillors, after this one, we'll have a 5-minute break if anyone needs it.
Madam Chairman, my name is Jeffrey Donald Bow. I'm a retired consultant physician and paediatrician. I've been a PC Brook landowner since 1993 and a resident with my family, PC Brook, in the city of Kalamunda since 1996. My wife Alison and I are immediate neighbours of Lot 3 and PC Brook. We draw water from a small dam in Hackett's Gully for household use that's been sampled, and some of the results are before you, as we do not have reticulated mains water supply. Our wastewater is processed by an ATU that was installed in 2014. This system has a discharge area over 100 metres from PC Brook as instructed, and is appropriately placarded with warnings, no human contact with the water. We must acknowledge great assistance from Digby Johnson, who you've heard from, one of the elders in the valley, in understanding some of the issues surrounding development application before council. And I also thank my office manager and wife Alison for her help. Under freedom of interest of correspondence between the city, the Shire first and the city second of Kalamunda, and the proponent and various agencies, we've been able to gain some insight into the twists and turns of this development since 2006. In summary, the proposed development on Lot 3, with wastewater management from 480 persons per day, will likely lead to major damage in our amenity, and we will pursue repair. The DEWA are still most concerned about the likelihood of nutrient-rich water runoff, wastewater, and petrochemical contamination of Hackett's Gully and Peasy Brook. After reviewing the report provided by Evergreen Consultancy, that's the new report, not 2019. The ATU delivered to Lot 3 will still be suitable for 80 persons a day wastewater load, and they'll be able to rinse their vegetables under running water. If you read all of the usual instructions, we're trying to restrict water use that will flood the ATU when they've got the enormous machine that's already been delivered to the site, and you've only got 80 people, it'll be a laugh. We do not support the increased wastewater load and request that Lot 3 land use be maintained as for a restaurant with 80 persons on site in any given day. This was approved in June 2008. This 80 persons a day figure has not plucked out of the air or a blanket approval as suggested previously. It's in fact an increase of 60% on the usual 50 that applies in the water catchment area. So that would apply to a tea room or a small restaurant. It also sits well as regards the city's own advice on ATU installations and use, when you look at that on the website, and the planning documents contained in Local Planning Scheme number 3, LPS 3, Part 6. These deal with the special control areas, which include Middle Alina catchment area and our beautiful valley. LPS 3 identifies Lot 3, our Lot 12, and others, including the proponents' personal home, as falling within priority 2 water catchment area. And under 6.6.7, that scheme states that the Shire shall have particular regard to any advice received from the Department of Water, now DEWA. B, DEWA's land use compatibility in public drinking water source areas, that document. D, the requirements of State Planning Policy 2.7, public drinking water source policy. E, the potential impact on the proposal on the quality of water resource. And F, adequacy of proposed measures to meet water quality targets and manage runoff and drainage. The WA Department of Health, who have been used by the proponent and his consultants as the source of approval for not only the use of an ATU and the model to be used, which we support by the way, but the site of its installation and of its effluent discharge areas, to the exclusion of advice from DEWA. This is difficult to understand. In citing the Department of Health's approval, the proponent and his solicitor reports consistently ignore the last paragraph of that approval from the Department of Health. You look at that at attachment 8.1.115. And this states, please note that this is an exemption to the requirements of GSP and does not exempt requirements of other legislation, including the Planning and Development Act 2005. The DEWA still remain particularly concerned about the likelihood of nutrient-rich wastewater and petrochemical contamination, as I said, after looking at the Evergreen Consultancy's new report. Landform research, Mr. Lindsay Stevens' review, does not appear to have been scrutinised by DEWA, but correct me if I'm wrong on that. The waste and stormwater is to flow into lots 100 and 101, much to the consternation of the stewards in 101. And an ephemeral spring, as Digby pointed out in his questions, now expanded to be a dam on lot 100. Look at the site plan 8.1.116 on your agenda attachments, with comments by Mr. Stevens on it from the 4th of May. And this should be of grave concern to supporters of this expanding development. The repeated references to 30 years of approved patronage of 350 persons a day is just plain wrong, and it's been dealt with by others. The city really should be ashamed that it's used this in its statement in these documents. I'm sorry, I'm getting angry. The city's solicitor peer review report claims that almost complete removal of nitrogen and phosphorus loads from the effluent will occur in new terraced relocated discharge areas. of 3,126 square metres, the primary area, and of possibly 1,111 square metres in the secondary area, or part thereof. This will involve further land clearing, plenty's gone on already, up to 80% by some estimates, despite the fact the EPA has previously forbidden clearing, and more permeable soil will have to be imported. The proponent, of course, agreed to no new clearing as one of the conditions for building approvals, but seems to have forgotten this. The water permeability data amaze me. They cannot be telling the whole story. Observations during downpours living in the Perth Hills do not support the assurances of Evergreen Consultancy or Landform Research or the Department of Health that no contamination of waterways will occur. The place that comes a flood, a wash. Who will be responsible for the additional cost for cleaning up the mess? Once that waterway is contaminated, it's very, very difficult to bring it back to health. In 2019, Evergreen quoted an average annual rainfall, but it was from the Perth figures, the airport, I think, rather than for Bickley Valley. Even with a dry 2019, we had over a metre of rain total. Falling rainfall, annual rainfall, is used as an argument in the reports for there being a benefit from effluent runoff into our waterways and groundwater. Make up your mind. So I have another passionate thing that I'll perhaps leave out about algal blooms in Rocky Pool, but you get the message. I don't think this is a draw card for tourism by any means. Now the proponent intends to discharge 14,000 litres a day for the Biomax C80 model ATU, a huge increase in volume. Previous approval was for 540 litres a day of wastewater. The same area, 2.62 hectares, massive increase. Stormwater from the existing car parking areas is, as I said, supposed to be headed for a dam on Lot 100 that came from an ephemeral spring in the good old days. This has not been considered, I don't think, by DUA or the WA Planning Commission. Perhaps I'm told that you don't have to consult them, but it seems you do in policy. And it's most unlikely to be supported, I believe. Hydrocarbons are likely to contaminate Peasy Brook, particularly through escape from grease traps in the car park.
Mr. Bow, you have one more minute if you could start winding up.
I was just going to point out that although we're getting drier in the southwest, according to climate change, storms will become more frequent and more severe. We will support the non-conforming use of Lot 3 to be a restaurant as previously approved, but not a function centre cum restaurant with a patronage of 480 persons per day as per.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions of Mr. Bauer? No, thank you for coming to speak to us. Councillors, we're going to have a very short break. I believe the CEO has a comment.
Through the chair, I've just had a request from Mr. Tim Howling. He is deputy number 11. He would like to be moved forward with his deputation in front of the others. He's a lawyer representing a community group. Obviously, they're paying for his time, so he would like to see if council and the presiding member are happy to move him up so he can make his deputation next.
I'm very happy to do that, and I call Mr. Howling to give his deputation, please.
Thank you, councillors, for accepting me to go a little bit earlier tonight. This is a matter of great importance to a number of the members of this community because the proposed development is not an extension of an existing development, but it is in fact to be considered as an entirely new development. And when you look at the report that's before you, it's replete with references to the fact that an existing development is in fact in place. That's not the case. It's not a non-conforming use. It is not a use which had been carried out in accordance with clause 10.6. That is, that it's been commenced within a period of 2 years from the approval having been granted. In fact, when you look at the nature of the buildings as distinct from the use, you will notice that the buildings were built shortly after the applicant came to purchase in October 2017. Now, this doesn't appear to have been picked up by anybody, but an aerial photography at the very least appears that in a period of approximately 2017, there was a significant amount of work that had been undertaken over the site. Now, unless there's another development approval which is not being referred to within the report, then in those circumstances, it would be open at the very least to conclude that the form, that is the built form that is in existence today, was not carried out consistent with the approval that had been granted, as is referred to often within this report in 2011. So, member councillors, the replete references within this particular report to the fact that there has been a past approval which has been granted is not, and it does not appear to be correct to the circumstances because, firstly, a development as granted must be acted on within 2 years. No use was made of the property for a period of that 2 years for the purposes of that approval, it would appear, as is accepted, it would appear by this report. And secondly, the built form does not appear from aerial photography to have been undertaken until approximately October 2017. Now, therefore, whatever the building had been approved for in the past is no longer a non-conforming use right, and you can refer to your own town planning scheme and look at the non-conforming use rights provisions found within clause 4.10. So clause 10.6 makes clear that you need 2 years to carry on the use of the premises as well as the physical development. Now, development does take those two corners and two very important pillars, use and physical development. So it is correct for you now tonight to lay to one side the past approvals and to consider this particular application afresh for 480 persons to be built on a parcel of land which is within the landscape rural zone. Now, it's important to have careful consideration to the objectives of this particular zone. The landscape interest zone is a rural landscape interest zone, and that use of the word rural should not be overlooked. It includes a number of features, and that is to ensure the development is in harmony with the natural environment. What is proposed is cutting, felling, and significant site works. There is a number of those aspects that do work with the contours of the site. Then secondly, it is required to work together with the natural resource conservation and compatibility of the public water supply objectives. I do not repeat what has been previously said by other persons, save to note that it is within a P2 water catchment area, a matter that needs to be properly taken into account as part of the objectives of the Rural Landscape Interest Zone. It's also mentioned within the objectives to conserve water and the watercourse capacity, as well as to retain large lot sizes which will allow for rural activities. The nature of and objectives of your scheme, the scheme passed by this council, is to consider to allow for rural activities. Now, bearing in mind you're considering this development afresh, the question that you need to ask yourself is whether or not what is proposed is truly a rural activity. And the last part, which has received some focus by previous speakers, is to encourage the reduction of bushfire hazard. It's not to maintain bushfire hazard, it's not to manage bushfire hazard, it's not to try to make sure that people who are escaping the area can safely escape, it is to reduce bushfire hazard. Now, if you're going to reduce bushfire hazard, you don't put 480 people into a location which has one road in and one road out. We don't know where the attack of the bushfire is going to be, but that, in my books, on a plain and ordinary reading, as you're required to do as councillors today, accepting your very onerous obligations, in looking at the objectives of the scheme, it does nothing to reduce the bushfire hazard. So, member councillors, we say that there is nothing about this proposal that is consistent with the rural landscape interest at all. Now, that's hardly surprising. We need to bear in mind that we're now in the year 2020. Whatever the past history of this particular use has been, presently, bushfire issues have changed. It's changed throughout this country. It's changing. There's a Royal Commission underway in respect of bushfire, and within your own locality, you have experienced a population increase. The roads have become busier. The Shawmac report hasn't considered cyclists using the road. The wastewater management facility that is proposed is not consistent with the objectives of the scheme. Things have moved on, and it is time to ensure that the Rural Landscape Interest Zone is properly applied by the council in considering whether or not this development is truly consistent with the objectives of what is intended. Now, the report does mention in a number of locations that there is some concerns in respect of the rural landscape zone and the rural character. I mentioned noise. The noise report does not specifically go into a site-specific analysis. It is at best a desktop analysis, which says that at least the patrons will be encouraged to stay a little bit quiet after a certain time, 10 p.m. at night, and the workers there will be encouraged to keep quiet, but it is not a site-specific study. In other words, it is not a study that is consistent with the rural landscape, the rural interest, the reason people live in Kalamunda, to escape those areas which is full of commercial activities down on the flats. You've got a unique environment, and I encourage you to keep it that way. Now, the size and the scale of the proposed development should not to take into account those items of the development which on aerial photography appear to have been undertaken in 2017. Because at least from our research, we can't see where those parts of that development had been lawfully carried out at that point. At least on what we're able to see from the aerial photography, and at least from what we can see in respect of the referred planning approvals. So we say that size and scale of the type and form of building, which is properly noted within the officer's report, is a matter that you as councillors properly need to be taking into account when you consider this particular development. Now, not only the size and scale, if one were to assume that the past approval was still in place, which we say it's not, but if, then the proposal is to increase by 6 times that past approval. So it's for that reason that we say nothing of this particular development application is consistent at all with what is intended within the objectives of this particular zone. The report is replete with it, and it is necessary to lay aside a past approval. There are no past approvals. This is a new application, and the question before you tonight is whether or not you want 480 people to access Mundaring Weir Road, to drive into that particular location without safe bushfire management plans, to reduce the bushfire management load, without taking into account cyclists and other persons, without properly considering questions relevant to noise and other amenity impacts, to that rural landscape interest zone. Councillors, we recommend, and the community group that support us and have requested that we make a deputation late this afternoon and come here tonight to address you, asks that you refuse the form and nature of the development. Its history should stay there and not be re-enlivened because it is not consistent with the modern objectives of what this zone is intended to achieve. It is a significant intensification of a land use which properly ought to be found within your commercial zones and not in your rural zones. Thank you, members of the council.
Councillors, do you have any questions for Mr Howling? Thank you very much for coming to speak to us.
And thank you for having me, Elizabeth.
You're so welcome. Could I now ask Mr Peter Stewart or Miss Peter Stewart to come and give her deputation?
My name is Peter Stewart and I live at 79 Alderside Road in Piercy Brook. Good evening, Mayor and councillors. My family and I have lived peacefully in Piercy Brook for 22 years and we've raised our 4 children here. We share our one property line with the Charlie Ruggie and also a second property line with the applicant Matt and Catherine McCormick. We do not agree with the application for the development or the increasing patron numbers from 80 due to the alarming lack of bushfire safety, therefore risking lives. These 3 safety risks are: 1, the bushfire attack level. Bell report seems inadequate and out of date. 2, the emergency of fire evacuation plan, inadequate and dangerously incorrect, potentially risking lives. 3, the applicant has never completed a bushfire management plan as requested by DFES. I'll now elaborate on these points. 1, the bushfire attack level, the Bell report. The applicant submitted a bushfire attack level report dated February the 21st, 2019, version 2, prepared by Smith Consulting. My concerns are: firstly, I'll refer to an email sent to Peter V by Ivana L, officers of the City of Kalamunda, dated 16th of October 2019. This email has been obtained through the Freedom of Information. The email states that the Bell assessment was based on the site inspection conducted on the 24th of October 2018. This email states, since the on-site inspection, there has been works on the site, most notably the importation of fill material. These works have changed the landscape and increased the grade of the slope, which has changed the landscape as a result. I refer to Safe Rights letter to the City of Kalamunda, dated 31st of January 2020, which states, only minor earthworks have been undertaken. This is untrue. I refer to the letter of the Department of Fire Emergency Service, Director of Land Use and Planning, Ron de Blanc, addressed to Mr Reagan Travis, the Principal Statutory Planner at the City, dated the 5th of May 2020. The DFES's director's final recommendations was that the Bell had insufficient information and that the previous advice provided by DFES on the 5th of August 2019 has not been addressed. 2, the emergency evacuation plan. I refer to the emergency evacuation plan completed by Safe Right, dated the 10th of January 2020. My concerns are: the evacuation plan is inadequate, incorrect, and genuine safety risk to the lives in the event of a bushfire emergency. This is because the report states incorrect data for the evacuation of a fire to the east and also of a fire to the south, and these are, on page 7, fire to the east. Directions are: Route 1, traffic will be directed south onto Mundaring Weir Road and then into the Kalamunda Town Centre. Route 2, traffic will be directed north on Mundaring Weir Road before taking the first left into Fern Road and into Hummerston Road. Proposed danger: Hummerston and Fern Roads are both dead ends with no vehicle access into Hummerston Road. This road does not exist. This leaves only one exit, being Mundaring Weir Road, a dangerous winding road with dense bushland, making evacuation dangerous or even futile for so many people to leave at once. This also applies to the evacuation plans to the fire to the south. With no exit via Fern Road with no exit via Fern Road, allowing one evacuation exit is dangerous. Google Maps will show you that these roads are open, but this is incorrect. 3. Bushfire Management Plan never completed. The applicant has never completed a BMP as requested by DFEDS. Also, in the letter, DFEDS notes that the City of Kalamunda has deemed the restaurant land use as vulnerable land. As the number of people accommodated may present an evacuation challenge. In summary, I'm asking that the City does not approve any future development or increase patrons over 80 because of the genuine risk to lives in the event of a bushfire. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Councillors, do you have any questions of Ms Stewart? Thank you very much for coming to speak to us. And now we would like Mr James Evans, if you would like to come and give your deputation.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. My name's James Evans, and I'm representing 85 Alderside Road. I do not live in Kalamunda, but I intend to possibly in the future. First of all, I want to really thank you, Honourable Mayor, and for allowing me the time to speak. I know it's a very important issue for the community, and I understand you're the trusted carriers of that role at this point, and so wanted to speak on behalf of myself and the property as well, because it's a very beautiful part of the land. It's a very beautiful property in that area that we want to keep safe and clear. Basically, what I wanted to say first of all was I thought I went through the responses. There isn't a lot of time to go through all the information, so I'm asking that if you can delay the decision for a later date, or reject the decision if you feel you have enough information with that, because I think 480, the scale of the project is the main issue, because as the scale is greater, the issues become much greater. I would question whether the profitability of the project is only limited at 480. Restaurants is all dependent on how many people you get, and you can do it at different times. The capacity is really not for me to judge, but it's a question of 480 or nothing seems to be a little bit unrealistic to me. My father purchased a block 35 years ago, and it's a small slice of nature that we really love. With the 56 objections that I was reading through, most of them did refer to the objection of the scope. And then I looked through, okay, so there are this many objections, there's this many comments. How many were really acted upon to change the proposal? And I only found one, and that was the change in the location of the irrigation. There was some additions as a result of that in relation to the operating hours, but then I saw the operating hours for me from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. from Sunday to Wednesday, and then 7 a.m. to 12 a.m. Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It doesn't seem like a really business plan to me that this is where you want to operate. You're just going for as many hours as you can obtain in the proposal. So, you know, there was mitigation comments in relation to noise, because that is a very important issue in the community, that I did see somewhere that at 10 p.m. the glass doors will be closed. And then I heard today that the glass in the doors was part of the mitigation of the sound, so therefore that will only occur at 10 p.m. from 10 to 12 a.m. So that's for 2 hours. And obviously in winter it will be closed, but sound travels better in the cold as well. There were some other comments I make, but most other people have covered them, and given the time, I did want to go over as well. But also the comment in relation to the number of patrons previously approved. I was surprised to see that was the standard answer from the proponent for the comment and request of information. And I even noted it said, Chalet Regi has never operated with approval numbers of 80 patrons. And that was right next to where the council said it had an approval for 80. Okay, so it's never operated under that. So it operated under a lesser amount before, or similar. So, you know, the other point in relation to the operating hours I wanted to comment on, it's 17 hours a day on Saturday and Friday. That's a long, you know, I'm just amazed at that. And it's over 100 hours in a week that it's going to be open. And if you do want to, if it is a function centre or if there is a large number, the only way that I understand to get people there is entertainment. And entertainment usually is noisy. So that's what I would question about the ability or the aspect of allowing for live entertainment. Yes, sometimes at weddings now you can have silent discos with the earphones. That's a good idea. But even just at midnight, people leaving, the car park is very adjacent to the eastern end of our property. And so you've got 200 people, 100 people, let's say it's a wedding, 150 people, going to their car, knocking their doors. You know, it's very disturbing. So that's, I just wanted you to consider that, and I know you are considering that. But I appreciate you all being here as well, and the service you do for the community. And I know you do get a bit of flack from people, and I apologise for that. But it's an important decision, and I really appreciate you considering other people, which you do, which I'm sure you do, in relation to a project like this. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Councillors, do you have any questions? No, thank you for coming to speak to us. And now I would ask Rosemary Parker if she would come and give her deputation.
Good evening, councillors. I have to say that some of the comments that soft-voiced deputies have made have not been able to be heard. So if I do duplicate some information, I apologise. However,
do you kindly just state your name and address for the minute taker? Thank you.
Rosemary Parker. I live at 59 Croxton Road in PC Brook. I'm making this deputation as a member of the PC Brook residents group. The purpose of my deputation is to request a deferral of a decision on this matter for 1 month until such time as ratepayers can exercise their right to attend. It's very unfortunate that it's happened during this period of the COVID restrictions. My purpose is also briefly to explain why a rigorous assessment of the proposal in an appropriate time frame by residents and by our elected councillors matters so much to individuals and families in Bickley Valley, to members of our Hills community, to the reputation of the City of Kalamunda, and to visitors who enjoy the Perth Hills. The agenda and 19 associated documents for this meeting were published on the City's website on Thursday the 14th of May, allowing just 3 business days for members of the public to access and respond to this proposal. Including the agenda documentation amounts to nearly 450 pages. For councillors who must make a decision, Additional pertinent information is stored in the Shire's records system. Scrutiny of the proposal, I probably don't need to point that out to you, I'm sure you know. But scrutiny of the proposal is particularly important as the proponent's contention, and I know this is also being mentioned, the proponent's contention, quote, the restaurant has only ever operated under approval for 350 people is demonstrably incorrect. Correspondence and meeting minutes between the Shire of Kalamunda with WA Government departments and the proponent over a decade consistently reiterate the limitation of the proposed restaurant to 80 persons per day. And the claim, quote, the applicant is seeking to increase an increase of only 37% in capacity from 350 to 480 people, including staff, is not substantiated by the Council's own records, which kindly were provided to the PC Brook Residents Group under an FOI request. So the proposed expansion, in fact, represents a 600% increase from 80 to 480 people per day. And you've heard a lot of comments about the inappropriateness of that expansion. This patronage limit is critically important as it confirms the sensitivity of the area and is supported by repeated refusal by the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation to accept an increase in this sensitive drinking water area of the Middle Helena catchment. The Department of Water's latest letter to this effect is one of the associated documents, as you will be aware. So the six-fold increase in patronage in an area of fragile natural beauty will affect the lives of residents of PC Brook and those living along the surrounding road network. It also poses a significant risk, as has been explained, to the drinking water source for locals and for the Greater Perth area. At a time when the natural environment and water resources locally and globally are under increasing threat, it seems unconscionable that the Council is recommending to our elected councillors a decision that contravenes so many elements of the city's own planning scheme and its commitment to preserve water resources, our green spaces, and the natural beauty of the hills. So these are the reasons why this decision is such an important one. On the matter of public engagement, allowing ratepayers just 3 business days to review such a quantity of information and to prepare their deputations is clearly inadequate. And recently, due to COVID-19, interested residents have now been prevented from coming to Council to scrutinise the proponent's latest documents, having received advice from the Council that this was the only means of viewing the information. And I have to say that not everyone looks at Facebook. So even though apparently the proponent placed the documents on Facebook, not everyone was aware of that. Also, due to COVID-19, we are currently advised that the maximum allowable attendance at this meeting is 20 people. So this further restricts the opportunity of local residents to exercise their right to attendance at such a significant meeting. And while we ratepayers recognise the Council's effort and commitment over the decade in relation to this vexed development, the Council's motivation at this time is concerning. It's critical to the credibility of the City of Kalamunda's governance processes and vision statement that members of the community and their elected councillors are accorded the time and due process to prepare their deputations and arrive at decisions that will affect us all for years to come. So in finishing, I just draw your attention to an item that has been mentioned, item 6.3 of the Standing Orders Local Law 2015, which states that where an item on the agenda at a council meeting is contentious and is likely to be the subject of a number of deputations, the council may resolve to meet at another time to provide a greater opportunity for these to be heard. So in consideration of these comments, I respectfully request that councillors approve the postponement of a decision on patron numbers for this development for a period of 1 month or to a date that allows all interested members of the community to exercise their right to attend and make their deputations at an appropriate meeting. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Parker. Councillors, do you have any questions? Thank you for coming to speak to us tonight. I would like to ask Mr. Mac McCormack to come and give his deputation.
Good evening, Madam Mayor. Good evening, councillors. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come here tonight. My name is Gordon McCormack. I'm commonly known as Mac, and I live in 81 Alderside Road, PC Brook, which is adjacent to 415 Mundaringware Road, which is commonly known as Shallyriggy. I have lived in that area for over 30 years, and this is the second time that I've come before this council in regards to increasing the numbers on Shallyriggy from 80. The previous time, it was to increase from 80 to 350, and I went through and answered questions, and that was voted on and approved for 350. I raised at that point in time that the numbers of 80 is commercially non-viable because it's our intent to service both road bike riders and mountain bike riders, of which we have ample along Mundaringware Road. We can have 80 people arrive at breakfast, which would mean that we would then have to close the restaurant, and we can't take bookings either for lunch or for dinner. There's councillors here who will remember those words from when I was here approximately 10 years ago. At that point in time, we were approved for 350 on the basis that our sewage system complied with Department of Health regulations, and we went away and put forward all paperwork and got approved from Department of Health, and those approvals were stamped both by Department of Health and Kalamunda Council. Unfortunately, the price of that system went through the roof, and for commercial reasons, we did not install that system. The Department of Health licence was for 2 years. That licence expired, and we were advised by Council to start this process over again. I've now been trying to reopen Shallyriggy for 14 years, and I ask you for your support because I am a resident of Kalamunda, I'm a local businessman, and I'm fully compliant with all acts, regulations and the law. And the reason that this has been put forward and recommended by council officers. In regards to comments made today, if I can add additional information, the number 80 that's been put forward has been put forward by Department of Water. In discussions with Department of Water here in this council, they have advised me that they are an advisory organisation only. They are not a legal body that you, councillors, have to go by their recommendation. When we have asked them why they've chosen 80, they have stated that they have chosen that number to make any attraction in the hills non-commercially viable, that they do not want any attraction anywhere in Perth Hills. That goes against the state government's, the elected government's, policy on tourism. And as a businessman, I believe it is unfair. We own an engineering company and we put forward engineering solutions to overcome whatever a situation may be. We've put it to DEWA that what could we do to increase that number? And they've answered nothing. They have no intentions of increasing because the number is specifically designed to stop any form of attraction, of tourist attraction. Other restaurants in that valley I've seen over the 14 years get approved from this council, and DEWA recommendations have been put aside. And I'd ask you, as councillors, to do this again, because this is the second time we're asking for an increase. The last time for 350, and now this time 480. That's based on the normal requirements for restaurants, which is 1 person per square metre, and Shelley building area is over 1,000 square metres, so we're well under. The area 480 is based on Department of Health's requirements. It's as they specify that each person that walks into a restaurant utilises 30 litres of water. We can't see how that's humanly possible. Well, that's a 25-litre jerry can and a 5-litre jerry can that each person is going to use. Our toilet systems have been fitted with 5-litre flushes. So if every person that goes to the restaurant, 480, times 5 gives you 2,400 litres of water maximum. However, in order to comply with Department of Health regulations, we have to install a $100,000 state-of-the-art sewage system, and according to the Department of Health, in theory, we'll use 14,000 litres a day. I don't believe it's engineeringly possible, and we intend to record the amount of water that's actually used and put it forward to council, because I don't believe that figure will ever be reached. In going through in some of the points that have been raised with noise, once again we've put in place engineering solutions. We've put doors that close so that we can barrier the noise inside. So if people are having a meal, a laugh with their families and so forth, it's not upsetting the neighbours. Those doors cost $15,000 each, and we chose them specifically to stop noise. I live directly next door. I love the area that we live in. It is not in my intention to terrorise our neighbours or upset our neighbours. We have a very good working relationship. I intend to maintain that relationship going forward. Smoking area was another area that was asked. There's a large grassed area going in place, which we refer to as beer garden, which under regulations and so is referred to as open restaurant area. That area is in the open and will be the smoking area. There's 2 different areas in place. Hackett's Gully. We have had the water tested at high flow, and it is a polluted stream. There are plant nurseries upstream from Hackett's Gully, and that water is not recommended to be used as it is not clean water. Testing has shown that the water that comes from the ATU system, Department of Health approved, is 2,000 times cleaner than the water in Hackett's Gully, and that's at full flow. So we would be doing the creek a favour if the water actually found its way into Hackett's Gully, which it will not. Off-grid fire, you remember it was put forward in regards to a generator. We're more than happy to have, I'll take the point from Frank Lindsay, a neighbour of ours, in regards to a generator for emergency lighting. I think that's a good idea. We haven't put that forward in our proposal, but I'm happy to take it on board. In regards to firefighting, we have over a $200,000 firefighting system in place, and we have built water reservoirs completely around the restaurant, and one of our, all of which are off-grid. They're all diesel or petrol generators and not relied on electricity. Oh, dams. I wish there was a natural spring on my property, which has been reported here, because if it was, my dam would be full, but my dam is empty, so there is no natural spring on next door for the runoff from the car park, which runs onto my property. Roads, escape areas. During the summer period, the fire escape between Hummerston Road and Fern Road is open when there is a fire risk. So cars can drive through. It's a dirt section of about 300 metres, but it's downhill. You do not require a four-wheel drive. There is 4 different routes. There's Mundaring to the east, Mundaring Road to the east, Mundaring Road to Kalamunda, all the side road through the valley, and Fern Road and onto Hummerston Road to escape the area. Obviously, from a management point of view, if there was a risk of a fire or a fire was reported under the ABC radio, we would be evacuating the restaurant well in advance, and we would not be intending to be serving meals if there was a threat of a fire. Earthworks was brought up in regards to on the property. We received a request from council to upgrade our fire breaks. The fire breaks in the area were 3 metres, or near 3 metres, but there's 2 properties. There's 81 Alderside Road, which is my residential, and there's 415. And therefore, on the boundary, it requires 2 fire breaks next to each other, 6 metres. The report from the fire inspection was that the fire vehicles would not be able to travel along the fire break, and so we went through and upgraded the fire breaks, which levelled, we brought dirt in, because if you've been on the property, you'll see that it's large rocks, natural rocks, which are referred to as floaters. In order to avoid smashing up those rocks, we brought dirt in order to comply with the Bushfire Act, which is the law. We did so until we received notification from council to stop works, of which we did, and there's one section of about 100 metres, or maybe 70 metres, that needs to be completed in order to comply with the Bushfire Act. Mains Water. We are on Mains Water, and therefore...
Mr McCormack, can I just ask you to wind up?
No, that'll do. I'm more than happy to finish at that point.
Thank you. Questions, councillors? Councillor Sewell.
Through the Chair, thanks for attending this evening and for attempting to address some of the concerns which has been raised by residents. I'm well aware of the amount of work that has gone in and the intent behind it. There are just some things that I'm wanting to clarify. In terms, a lot of the information that you've provided this evening seems somewhat contradictory to information that has been provided, and councillors have been asked to make a controversial decision tonight, and that clarification is needed. So specifically, I would like reference made to the minutes where 350 were previously approved, please, because that's a point of clarification which is important. My other question is the dirt that you brought in to comply in terms of the bushfire arrangements, and my apologies for having my back to you, Mac, but I need the microphone. Where was the dirt sought, and was it clean material?
The dirt was from Mundaringware Road upgrade, which was going from in front of our property where the bridge was increased, and went from 415 Mundaringware around past 500 Mundaringware Road, and travelled east towards Mundaringware. The contractor was working, I believe, for the council. Part of their responsibility was for recycling of the dirt, and so the dirt travelled approximately 500 metres from where they took it off the road, and then relocated it onto our place where it was reutilised as part of our fire breaks.
So my second question, as part of that question, was it clean material?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Are there any other questions, councillors? Councillor Ritchie.
Thanks for your deputation, Mr McCormack. We've heard a little bit tonight about similar sorts of developments, mainly Corsada and the recent one which was given approval in Union Road. I'm not sure what Mason Mill has as a number, but I'm aware that the other two have 250 as the approval, and I accept that each approval is very different. But it seems to me that certainly Corsada is a very profitable business, and I think for a lot of people it's about the scale of the upscaling to the 480, which is of concern. And I'm wondering why 480 of the figure. I understand that it's what the health department allows you to do in terms of the sewage, but I'm just wondering why a figure of 480 if there are commensurate restaurants in the city that are able to work at around about the 250 level.
Thank you for your question. I'm a businessman, and I've made a major investment in the hills, and I'm looking to comply with the law. and the regulations. And in every case that we've put forward, we're fully compliant. The limitations on the property is with Department of Health. It's for the sewage treatment, which is the disbursement of the treated water. The whole of the site, the materials we've used is recycled, and we would very much like to recycle the black and grey water and use it on the property so there would be no effect on the environment at all. Unfortunately, Department of Health at this point in time will not allow us to do so. So in answer to your question, the 480 is what's been put into me as the maximum number that we are allowed to legally apply for.
Councillor Sewell, you have another question?
Thank you, Chair. I have two more questions. So there has been some questions raised in terms of the validity of the advice provided by the Department of Health. Matt, you're a businessman. Department of Health, I assume, have based that advice, I would hope, on science. I would like to get an understanding, please, of where these figures in terms of the water usage has come from. That's further information that I'm formally requesting. In addition to that, I would like to put residents and the community's mind at ease. MAC has advised that there is no stream. Can we please seek clarity and have some level of inspection to see whether there is in fact a stream on the property, which MAC has disputed?
Can I clarify that? It's spring. Spring was the word I was using. Spring.
Perhaps I could ask the Director to give you some more clarification.
Through the Chair, the information provided to the Department of Health was prepared by the applicant, and it included site investigations, including but not limited to geotechnical reports that were provided to the Department of Health in their assessment of their application for 480 persons wastewater system. In regards to the spring, this question was asked earlier today. I've consulted with staff internally, and we don't believe that there is a spring or a dam on the property from the inspections that we've undertaken, from the analysis of the aerial photography that we have, and from the accounts of the current landowner. There's no dam or spring that we are aware of through the information that we've been able to source.
Follow-up question, Councillor Sewell.
So my follow-up question, which I'm formally putting to you this evening, is for that site inspection to occur to make that determination, please.
Through the Chair, that request will have to come through the CEO, but I have no objections to undertaking another site inspection for that purpose.
Councillors, do you have any more questions of Mr McCormack?
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for coming to speak to us. I would now like to ask Nikolai Mehanikov to come and give his deputation. Please state your name and address. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Nick Mehanikov. I live at 131 Alderside Road in Peasy Brook, and I'm here to discuss perhaps one or two concerns in relation to the noise management plan that was, the revised noise management plan that was submitted by the proponents. So I'm going to keep it short given that I'm the last speaker. In reading a previous email that was prepared, submitted by Peter Borellis, I tend to agree with one of his primary concerns, and it is one of my key concerns in reading through the noise management plan, and that is that the plan, unfortunately, doesn't assist in determining the development, or whether the development will comply with the current noise regulation. So that's the primary concern. There is a secondary concern. As part of the submission, it's my opinion that the submission could have considered, or at least adopted, an acoustic assessment, i.e. noise modelling, of the potential noise emitted from the venue in conjunction with ambient conditions background noise conditions for varying operations over the period of the day in various sensitive areas. And this noise assessment would very clearly establish a basis or a reference for all of the local residents to better appreciate how the controls can be applied in order to mitigate the emission. The second concern that I really do have is that in order to apply effective controls, one needs to measure the problem. In other words, the potential of noise being emitted. There is nothing in the plan that I guess suggests that as part of the noise management, there is a process whereby the noise could possibly be measured, and if potentially exceeded, additional control measures and mitigations put in place to prevent, I guess, local complaints from nearby residents, and therefore, mitigate the potential, I guess, ongoing issues associated with noise. Now, as we've all heard this evening, and there's been a number of, concerns mentioned by council, that, noise is a very sensitive issue. What I've noticed from my previous role as an occupational noise officer is that it's quite often subjective, and it can be very difficult to clearly determine what those noise levels are unless they are measured and then, as I've mentioned, actively controlled to mitigate the exposure. It's very easy to do. Staff could be trained in using handheld sound meters. They could take predetermined measurements at reference locations, namely boundary, potential loud sources of emission, and they could monitor those reference points in order to ensure that they are below acceptable levels, and therefore ensure that the sound that's emitted to local residents is below accepted levels and within the guidelines as stipulated by the Noise Regulation Act. That's really all I wanted to point out as part of the proposal with regard to the noise management plan. I did appreciate certainly the effort going into organising the operational aspects of how the plan would be acted upon. I think there's a lot of thought, there's a lot of commitment that's gone into that. I think with the establishment of this base reference case, taking into consideration the variations that could affect noise emitted from the facility and therefore, jeopardise the tranquility of the amenity, I think it's fair and reasonable to recommend that a noise assessment is made as part of your consideration in approving this development, and also further, as I've mentioned, to also include measurements, key measurements during several times of the day, throughout the course of the day, during sensitive periods of the day, towards the evening and also the night, more importantly, in being able to effectively administer the controls that obviously have been put in place, and we've heard about some of those this evening. So I thank you for hearing my concerns and welcome any questions.
Are there any questions for Nick? No, thank you so much for coming to speak to us.
Thank you, Margaret.
May I please ask Wayne Garwood to come and give his deputation?
I'm Wayne Garwood of 434 Mundine Weir Road, PC Brook. And thank you, Madam Chairman and councillors. I've lived in PC Valley since 1976. My wife, much longer. Her grandfather owned a fair chunk of the land affected by all this development, which was purchased in 1912. So there's a bit of history there. I'm going to talk about traffic and reference to the Transport Impact Statement by Shawmac. I've read through this report and found it very lacking in some areas relating to traffic impact on Mundaring Weir Road. As part of that, the last traffic count was undertaken by the City in March 2017 on traffic movements on Mundaring Weir Road. Since then, the traffic on Mundaring Road has increased substantially, particularly the last few months. I can fill in some of those vital details, particularly in regard to the increased road traffic if the patronage increases for the proposed 480 patrons. Since the early 1960s, there have been 9 road deaths on Mundaring Weir Road between Croxton Road and Fern Road. Shawmac have only identified 3 major incidents. Most of these road deaths can be verified by counting the crosses on the side of the road and 1 bike helmet in a tree. Shawmac's report summary states, a review of the crash history adjacent to the site did not indicate any safety issues with the road network, and that the additional traffic generated by the proposed development is not likely to increase the risk of crashes. Road bikes. Over the last few years, there has been a large increase of road bikes on Mundaring Weir Road. The majority of these riders are from outside Kalamunda district. There are many single riders, groups of riders and competition riders. As you're aware, there's no cycleway between Kalamunda Town and Mundaring Weir, so this is a shared road. What is of ongoing concern is the section of Mundaring Weir Road from Croxton to Fern Roads, which is very windy with steep drop-offs and steep inclines. There is a lot of potential conflict between vehicles and bikes in this stretch of road. This conflict is even more emphasised on weekends when there's a large increase of all types of traffic and at times a large increase of bicycles when there is competition rides. Increased traffic to and from the chalet will only exacerbate the situation. As we know, most drivers these days are impatient and will force their way past bikes in total disregard to other road users. There's been 1 bike death. Motorbikes. Most motorbikes using Mundaring Weir Road treat the road as a racetrack, travelling at excessive speeds at all times of the day and night. There have been 5 motorbike deaths in the stretch between Croxton and Fern Roads. 2 of these deaths were collision with other vehicles on tight bends. The others were impacts with trees. All of these accidents were caused by excessive speed and loss of control. There has also been 2 motorbike accidents in our vicinity have actually gone over the bank, resulting in minor injuries. Vehicles. In the time we have lived in the area, there's been at least 7 motorbikes go off the road between Croxton and Fern Roads, resulting in 1 death. All of those accidents were due to excessive speed, loss of control, etc. There's been 1 collision on PC Brook Bridge. There are 2 historic road deaths. I won't go to them. Those round about the late 50s, 60s. In the last 3 months, there have been 3 vehicle rollovers along the same stretch of road, one actually in front of the chalet rig, no major injuries. It is very possible other accidents have occurred that we're not aware of. Black spot. In recent years, the stretch of Mundaring-Weir Road between the junction of Alderside Road North and just beyond the Chalet Rigi to Fern Road was declared a black spot and appropriate signs placed. These signs have since been removed. Mountain bikes. In the last few years, with the installation of both legal and illegal mountain bike riding trails off Mundaring-Weir Road, there's been a large increase in vehicles driving from the metropolitan area with their mountain bikes to access these trails. This traffic occurs at all times of the day, every day, with a large increase on weekends. Kookaburra Outdoor Theatre. The Kookaburra operates during the summer months at Mundaring-Weir. The theatre opens Friday, Saturday and Sunday nights. There is increased traffic from Kalamunda and other suburbs early evening, travelling to the theatre, and then peak traffic returning when the theatre closes. This traffic will conflict with the evening traffic to and from the chalet. Traffic summary. From the above detail, you can see that since the 80 seats of the original Chalet Rigi and the next approval in 2006, there's been a dramatic increase of all types of traffic on Mundaring-Weir Road. Add to this the potential of many additional vehicles a day, every day, and especially weekends from the chalet. And the possibility of alcohol in the mix, the potential for increase in accident rate is obvious. Kangaroos are a constant hazard on the road, particularly in the evening. We personally have noted that many of the vehicles used in Mundaring-Weir Road do not adhere to designated speed limit of 60 km an hour. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do councillors have any questions for Mr Garwood? Councillor Sewell.
It's just really a follow-up question, I guess, from Mr Garwood's deputation. I'm just wondering, has there been any risk assessment undertaken in terms of bikes and any consultation with cycling groups?
Through the Chair, I would defer to the Director Asset Services.
Thank you for the question, Councillor, and through the Chair. The City's long-term financial plan, the City's bicycle master plan, identify that there are proposals to upgrade Mundaring-Weir Road to improve the capacity and issues with cyclists, and they're both being listed as projects in part of our master plan's long-term financial plan, so that's been recognised as an improvement necessary. I do want to, however, make one point in Mr Garwood's presentation with deputation that he considered there hasn't been traffic counts counted for some time in Mundaring-Weir Road. That's incorrect. The City completed traffic counts in September this last year, September 2019, and the average vehicle count was 1,500 vehicles per day on a road that is designated as a regional distributor, which does have the capacity for a much greater volume of traffic.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Mr Garwood? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Which leads us to our last deputation from Mr Kevin Bennett. If you'd like to come forward, Kevin, and give your deputation.
Kevin Bennett, 782 Welshpool Road East in Wattle Grove. Good evening, Mayor, councillors and City staff. Thank you for allowing me to address you all tonight. I'm making this deputation on behalf of the Kalamunda Chamber of Commerce. Unfortunately, our chairman cannot be here tonight, so I'm making this deputation on his behalf as a Chamber of Commerce committee member. The Chamber, the Kalamunda Chamber, would like to express their strong support for the reopening of Chalet Riggy restaurant with a capacity of 480 people. As a Chamber of Commerce, we want to see a robust business sector in the city, and we want to see Kalamunda regarded as a place that continues to encourage entrepreneurs willing to take risks necessary to ensure Kalamunda is seen as a major tourist attraction for West Australian, interstate and international visitors. We believe that the vibrancy and strong economic base of the city will be enhanced by a development of this quality. In the 1920s, Kalamunda was seen as a resort and a desirable weekend destination. We also would be proud to see Kalamunda appreciated for its natural beauty and world-class facilities. On a development level, Chalet Riggy is an outstanding venue. It has drawn a lot of interest from both local community and state politicians, including the Premier, Deputy Premier and Minister for Tourism, all of whom have acknowledged it to be a flagship venue and will have a huge benefit to Kalamunda. Its historical legacy is vast. A restaurant has operated on the site since 1946, and the current owners have taken great care to restore the original restaurant whilst developing a complementary modern extension. It's a place that can be enjoyed by all ages, a place to relax, unwind with your family and enjoy the beauty of the hills. On a local level, Chalet Riggy is a great asset to the city of Kalamunda and a huge draw card for locals and visitors alike. The owner's intention to use local produce and local staff to showcase the best of what our region has to offer should be commended. The development will be hugely beneficial to our local economy, and its cross-promotion and engagement of local businesses will be a much-needed boost for our economy, particularly in these tough times. Engagement of local staff will provide employment and training opportunities for those who may otherwise have had to look elsewhere, keeping our workforce right here in Kalamunda. The development will also draw visitors from across the Perth Metro, raising awareness of the region and encouraging them to explore other local venues and attractions. Whilst we understand the ambitious development of this kind might raise concerns, the planning process is a framework put in place to ensure that when developments are considered, there's due deliberation for a range of issues, including water, bushfire, traffic, noise and others. Once these issues are addressed to a satisfactory standard, there should be no reason why a development of this standard and history should not go ahead. In short, we want to see the Chalet Riggy development proceed to help revitalise our economy and instill confidence that amongst investors that Kalamunda is a great place to invest and do business. The Kalamunda Chamber of Commerce would urge the Council to approve this development in a timely manner for the benefit of our entire community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Are there any questions, councillors? Thank you so much for coming to speak to us. And that ends our deputations. So we move along to point 5, announcements by the member presiding. And I would like to ask Mr. Lindsay Stephen, the water consultant for the City of Kalamunda, who undertook a review, to make some comments, particularly about some of the issues that have been raised tonight.
Yes, thank you. I'm Lindsay Stevens. I'm a consultant. I have a background in geology, geomorphology and botany, and I've worked for many years, done a lot of work with quarries, done a lot of soil mapping. I've worked with nutrient management. I've worked with local governments, solving wastewater problems in places like Hyden, Esperance, Albany. I've done a lot of subdivisions with wastewater systems, particularly ATU systems, because they're usually located in more difficult circumstances. I was asked by the city to provide some input in terms of the various approvals that were required and the work that was undertaken. I visited the site in October. I've had a lot of experience with the Darling Scarp and the geology of the Darling Scarp. I can go into detail, but I can come back to that. I reviewed the site in detail. I reviewed the first documented management plan, and which had the water being disposed of at the northern end of the site, and it was my opinion that it was better to dispose the water in other parts of the site because the soil conditions were better and it was easier to manage. I then reviewed the second management plan, which was submitted in December 2019, and that's the one before Council. What I did was I reviewed the requirements of all of the people and government bodies that made a comment, like DWER, Department of Health and so on, and I also listed all of the issues that I thought were important or relevant, and they're in the report. For example, nutrients, water, all of those. The key thing about the site is obviously with wastewater is the protection of the watercourses. There are three key elements to wastewater. There's nitrogen, there's phosphorus and there's microbial material. These ATU systems are designed in themselves to remove much of those, well, all of them, but they do it in various ways. The microbial material is dealt with in the system. They have an aerobic chamber and they have an anaerobic chamber. And in those they have microbial material of cold temperature. What happens is the body, all the microbes that we have are hot temperatures. They're at body temperature, 35 degrees. So when that gets into the soil microbes kill it because they are cold water and cold temperature. So in the systems, the human and microbial material is destroyed, and there are very strict limits on how many of the microbial material is released in the wastewater, very strict limits. Not only that, if you dispose of that wastewater to the land surface, it has to be chlorinated, and the proposal is to chlorinate that wastewater and to kill off all the last microbial material. That is before the wastewater gets put onto the soil. The second one is the phosphorus. Phosphorus isn't really dealt with in the wastewater system. There's no real way that the phosphorus is reduced in the wastewater system at all. But what happens with phosphorus, it's very tightly bound with iron oxides and clays in the soil, and it relies on the clays in the soil to remove the phosphorus. And in the calculations I made, and you can easily do the calculations, these soils are very highly phosphorus retaining, and they will take all the phosphorus for hundreds of years within a few metres of the wastewater disposal. So there's no risk of phosphorus getting to the creek lines, unless, of course, the water can just flow straight there. If you put wastewater down a gutter and it flowed directly to the creek, then of course all those nutrients are going to go down there. But if it's getting into the soil, it stays in the soil and moves through the soil, all of the phosphorus will be lost. Nitrogen is denitrified. Nitrogen comes out as ammonia and then goes to nitrates and nitrites, which are NO2. And the bacteria in the soil, microbial material in the soil and in the wastewater system remove that oxygen. They undergo respiration in anaerobic or low oxygen conditions, and they take that oxygen for their energy and their respiration, and they convert it to nitrogen, and that nitrogen is lost to the air, where the air is 80% nitrogen. That occurs in the system, and there is a large nitrogen loss in the system. It drops by various systems, but it drops by anything up to, well, certainly 50%, but anything up to 80 or more % before it even comes out of the system. When that nitrogen goes into the soil, again the microbial material breaks it down, and in the soil you have clumps of soil, and around the outside you'll have aerobic, oxygenated soil, but inside the clumps you'll have anaerobic conditions, and the nitrogen is lost within a few metres of the wastewater systems. There's been quite a few studies done long ago now, but by Jurizzi, and I've quoted the references in my report, which show that on septic tanks and things in the hills. If they're constructed correctly, there will be no nitrogen, phosphorus or microbial material. The key is constructing and operating correctly. It then became, the Health Department made their recommendation and said if the site can take 480 people, this is the area you need for the wastewater disposal, which was 14,200 square metres. The site has been proven, in my opinion, to be able to take that sort of loading by moving the wastewater system to the south and having that as the primary wastewater system with a secondary disposal area to the north. Now, some of the people have mentioned, the proponent, for example, has mentioned that the wastewater loading will be less than, it's allowed for 30 litres per day per person. That allows for toilets, but it also allows for cooking. So cooking, washing up and those sorts of things. That's where the extra water comes in. It's not just toilets. But what happens is the loading is different. So, for example, on a different day, you'll have, like, on some days you may not have 480 people. On other days on the weekend, you'll definitely perhaps have 480 people. So the loading through the week, the average might be less than that. It might be 480 if it was fully loaded every day. If it isn't, which is probably quite likely in situations like this, if you averaged it, the actual loading might actually be less. So there's a built-in built-in conservative nature of that. If you dispose of the wastewater to the primary area in the south, you're also building in some conservative nature because the secondary area is to the north, it's a smaller area, it's closer to Hackett's Gully and so on. So I think, and it also having two areas gives some flexibility. Now, I'm not saying this to boost what's been proposed. This is what they proposed. These are my comments on it. They're just my factual comments. If I thought it was rubbish, I would tell you so, because that's my reputation. I won't get any work. The key thing about it, as I say in my report, the Health Act says that there's a 30-metre setback from watercourses or buffer. That applies to any valley. So in a normal situation, the water would flow, surface water would flow down to the valley and into the watercourse. So if you have a septic tank and it leaks, as some do, many do, it'll flow out of it and just go straight there. It's the surface water flow that gets there directly. If it goes into the soil and filters through the soil, the risks are minimal. So the key thing is the Health Act says 30 metres. On the other hand, the Department of Water required or recommended 100 metres in their policies. So that is a direct setback from uphill, downslope to the watercourse. What I've suggested and what I'm glad to see that the proponent has produced is that the water does not flow and cannot flow to Hackett's Gully. Hackett's Gully, along that ridge there's quite a granite ridge there. And there's a little bit of soil on the southern section of it, and I made the summary on the plan that was attached to my report. So I put my recommendations on there, my comments and recommendations. So the ones I agreed with, I didn't comment. The ones I thought needed a bit of extra work or a bit of comment, they're on here. So you will see on my comments, up in the northern section, I suggest that one little part of it there be moved, and I've put a red line around it, move that off. So these are more installation issues. There's enough area for that to occur. And all of the water should drain west. So, in other words, the 100-metre setback that's required or recommended by the Department of Water, DWER, is met as well. So, not only are you satisfying the Health Act, but you're satisfying Department of Water Conservation, Water Environment Regulation, their issues. I also went through and addressed all of the issues that were raised. I considered them all, I considered their policies, and you can see in my report I've made some comments about that. That's about the guidelines. It really comes down to designing the system when it's constructed to put the wastewater on a fairly level surface so that the water goes into the soil and goes through the soil before it travels out. The only area I had a little bit of a problem with, and it's in my recommendation, was the stormwater, which was something that the Department of Water Environment Regulation raised. I just think it needed a little bit more when it's constructed, or a little bit more thought, that it is separated from the wastewater. So it's near the wastewater disposal area, and it'll be piped. It's going to go to a basin in the middle of the car park, then down through the basin, out through a pipe, and going into the dam that's on the property to the west. Now, that's just, I thought, needed, you know, what are the sizes of the basin on this property, and just to make sure it was constructed in that way. I felt that there needed to be a little bit of work there. The other thing I thought needed to happen there was that because it's disposing off to another property, there probably needs to be some form of easement or something on that other property, because if the property to the west, which I think is Lot 101, is ever sold or separated from Shallow Regi, you want that stormwater to be able to be dealt with. So I think there needs to be some sort of mechanism there to enable that stormwater to continue to flow onto that property, and also if there's any repairs to be done to that dam or anything else, that's available. So that was my mind. The critical thing, I think, now becomes, if it is approved or if it got constructed, is the actual construction of it, the terracing and that sort of thing. It just needs to be done correctly. I don't think it needs to be, in my opinion, large management plans with large contour plans and all this sort of thing. It needs to have some contour plans, but when you actually get on site, you might find, oh, well, there's a rock outcrop here, we might have to do this or we have to do that. There'll have to be a little bit of flexibility, but I think there's enough ground proven up for that disposal of that amount of waste water, in my opinion. And I then made some recommendations on that. So if you've got any questions.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you for that comprehensive report. A couple of deputations mentioned the issue of the car park and the hydrocarbons runoff and so on. Could you, I don't know if you made any observations or if you have any observations about that concern that was raised?
Yeah, that's an issue for the car park and the stormwater. The amount of hydrocarbons you get out of a car park is usually pretty minimal. You know, you get the odd drip of water and drip of oil and things like that. It's not a large spill or anything like that, but it does occur. And normally it's difficult to detect in water. You can sample for hydrocarbons in water. The limit is 5 milligrams per litre usually, and you're pretty battling to detect that. It's something that needs to be addressed. I think, if I recall, the management plan had a separator, an oil separator. So what that is like a water tank, and what you take is the water comes into it. All the hydrocarbons, of course, float. They sit at the top, and the outlet is taken from the base and then flows out. So you're only taking out the fresh water. The hydrocarbon stays at the top. So if there was a spill or anything like that from any vehicle, that would be captured by that. That's my understanding, that they have put that into their management plan, and if they haven't, they should. And from that water would then go to the dam, which would also have some sort of a mechanism that would tend to retain the water. With hydrocarbons, it's not a big issue in terms of, everyone talks about hydrocarbons, but the reality is the standard practice, just to give you an idea, of remediating soil hydrocarbons or hydrocarbon spills in soils is actually to spread the soil out on the ground. The microbial material just destroy it, they eat it. Of course, if you have a spill, it goes down a waterway and all that sort of thing. Minor amounts I don't think you would detect it. I don't think there's oils in vegetation and all sorts of things. I think it's not an issue. Something has to be managed, and that's why I think there's a little bit more work needs to be done on stormwater.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Sewell.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering whether there was a willingness for the applicant to take on some of the recommendations as outlined by Mr Stevens in his report. Are we aware of the feedback?
Director.
Through the Chair, there are conditional requirements in any case. So if the applicant wasn't willing to undertake them and the city was wanting them to be undertaken, they wouldn't be able to fulfil that condition. So the matters that Mr Stevens has spoken about are covered generally by our conditions, particularly around stormwater and a stormwater plan having to be submitted to the city's satisfaction. The matters raised by Mr Lindsay would be part of satisfying the city in the preparation of that plan and the implementation of that plan.
Are there any other questions for Mr Stevens? Thank you very much for giving us all of that information. Point 6, there are no matters for which the meeting may be closed. Disclosure of interest. Are there any disclosure of interest, CEO?
Through the Chair, no, I've not received any, thank you.
Councillors, we now move on to the reports to Council, and the officer recommendation is on page 31. However, Councillor O'Connor and seconded by Councillor Janelle Sewell have foreshadowed a procedural motion which you have a copy of. I'm going to ask Councillor O'Connor just to say what that motion is and if you would like to say anything, and then I will put that to the vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillors, given the feedback that we've received from the community prior to tonight's meeting via emails and phone calls and the issues raised through deputations this evening, I think it's appropriate that we adjourn this meeting tonight and reconvene here in 2 weeks to allow the community and councillors more time to read and understand the report and the attachments. I will ask the CEO if we can make any new information or points of clarification publicly available on the website prior to the resumption of this meeting in 2 weeks, so that those who can't attend or engage can be kept abreast of what's going on.
Thank you. So you all have a copy of the motion that this meeting now adjourns until 6:30 p.m. on Tuesday the 2nd of June. All those in favour?
Hang on, excuse me, I've got a question first.
Question?
Sorry. I would like to get an explanation through the CEO, if I may, about what this means for the presentations tonight and for 2 weeks' time and what the process is.
I can answer
Thank
that
you.
question. If this motion is passed, then we will not be accepting any other deputations unless someone comes forward and can say they have new information. We will, however, continue to accept and respond to any questions in writing.
And Madam Chair, if I may, the officers are more than happy to place all of the questions that we've had today and the information as well as the live streaming onto our website in one spot, so community members can continue to read, and we'll continue to take questions, answer them and post them as we go over the next fortnight.
Councillor Rich, you have a question?
Thank you. I do have some concerns in the sense, so I certainly agree with the motion, but my concern is about the opportunity for people to in fact put a deputation in. I accept that we've heard all of the deputations from this evening and obviously we wouldn't want a repeat of those, but because of the limit of 20 people, we do know that there were a number of other people who were very keen, who are either unable to attend because of that limit. And I know that I understand the presiding officer does have the ability to allow additional deputations, and I would like some consideration be given, as well as the questions being put, that if people want a deputation, given the circumstances of the 20 with the COVID, that I think it would be reasonable that I wouldn't want to think anyone who had something to say was not given an opportunity to do so.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie, and as the presiding officer, I will absolutely do that. What I was really trying to say was we won't be hearing the same deputations again as we heard tonight. So we have a motion on the floor, we have a mover and a seconder. I'm going to put that motion. All those in favour? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, councillors.
Madam Chair, can I also just point out that Councillor Billett had sent through a message saying she wasn't well tonight, so can we have it minuted that she's now an apology, please?
Yes, and with that, I declare this meeting closed at 9:30. Adjourned. I declare this meeting adjourned at 9:30 to be resumed at 6:30 on Tuesday the 2nd of June. Thank you.